Did anyone else have this weird sense of deja vu a few weeks ago? I was scrolling through Steam and I stumbled across a game called Gigantic. Now normally I wouldn't pay this much thought, but I know I had seen this game before, so I did a little research and found out I was actually correct. Gigantic had already been released and shut down years ago, so this got me thinking, why in the world would a game that had flopped as hard as this be brought back out of the blue? So I decided to do a little more research. Buzz about Gigantic first began all the way back in 2013, as the developers Motiga had begun talking about a project known by the codename Raid, and on July 15, 2014, Raid would officially be announced under the name Gigantic with an initial release date set for 2015. However, as development went on, they would face hardship after hardship that would end up hurting the game in massive ways. The most impactful hardship they faced was in the form of development costs. They ran out of funds not just once, but twice. In just the first year of development alone, they ended up using their entire budget. This forced Motiga to look to another place to secure funding for their project, Microsoft. Microsoft partnered with Motiga and agreed to back their development costs under one condition, that they would release Gigantic on Xbox and Windows 10. In order for Motiga to meet these requirements, they were forced to scrap a lot of what they'd been working on so they could run on these new platforms. This forced them to announce that Gigantic's release date would be pushed back and would no longer launch in 2015. And unfortunately, this wouldn't be the only time this happened. This exact same scenario would happen yet again in 2016 as Motiga ran out of funds again. Only this time, it was much worse. The company had to lay off many employees and almost shut down as they were completely out of money. This made many fans skeptical that Gigantic would release at all, as this was the second time they'd run out of funds. But after about a month of zero money, they found another partner in Perfect World Entertainment. They agreed to finish funding the project on the condition that it would also be released on its own marketplace. And finally, in July of 2017, Gigantic was officially released. However, the hardships of the game only got worse from there. As the months went on, Gigantic's hardships would only get worse and worse as they struggled with the incredibly competitive landscape backed by a horrid lack of effective marketing. Due to the release date being pushed back, Gigantic's two biggest competitors had released almost a year earlier and had taken the hero shooter genre by storm. Overwatch and Paladins had both come out in 2016 and had grown exponentially in popularity, amassing millions of concurrent players. The popularity of these games even led to Overwatch getting its own esports league. With these two games already having their own dedicated player base, it left very little room in the market for Gigantic to thrive. Even with its unique art style, innovative gameplay mechanics, and potential for competitive play, Gigantic just couldn't get a foothold in the market as it became increasingly more difficult to attract players. They didn't have the budget to make something like a cinematic trailer, which both of Gigantic's main competitors did, and their messaging was very inconsistent and unclear, making it hard for players to know what made it stand out from others in the market. Scrolling through the videos they released on their YouTube to promote the game, you see almost nothing about what makes them stand out from the competition. You see things like character overviews and a few menial trailers, but outside of this one video titled Basic Tutorial Video, there's nothing covering their Guardians, the game's unique selling point that sets it apart from games like Overwatch and Paladins. Not only do they have no videos showing off their creative mechanics, but they have a plethora of videos just showing a new singular skin, which I don't understand, since they most definitely should have been focused on trying to draw more attention to the game with their mechanics and gameplay. But I digress. Even if you're looking at the release trailer they put out, there's nothing that's going to draw you away from an established game like Overwatch. I mean, they show a few different characters incredibly quickly and just brush over the things like Guardians and Creatures, which again are what set the game apart from the others. In all honesty, the release trailer genuinely just makes it look like a worse version of Overwatch that's in third person. Especially when you compare it to what Overwatch had been doing at the time. They'd release cinematic trailers to get you hooked on the story, countless extended gameplay footage of just about every character to get you hooked on the characters, and had an overwhelmingly positive reaction to the introduction of the esports league. With all the struggles that Gigantic was facing, the developers were losing a lot of money, and in November of 2017, only 4 months after the game's release, Motiga officially shut down. This also led to Gigantic shutting down entirely on July 31st, 2018, only 1 year after it was released. And with the thought that Gigantic was gone forever, everyone slowly began to forget about it. That was until October of 2023. Nearly 6 years after the shutdown, many former players began receiving an email stating that Gigantic would return for a limited time. A studio by the name of Gearbox had purchased the rights to the game and announced that Gigantic would return to the world from October 5th through the 7th. Many of the former players were overcome with joy, as a game they had long forgotten about would be returning to them for what they thought as a last hurrah. However, during this limited time, the game was so well received that in February of the following year, Gearbox announced that Gigantic would be re-releasing in April for all to enjoy. Many players began to develop hope for the game as it was being backed by a studio with a great reputation. Gearbox is most known for their Borderlands and Half-Life franchises, both of which are loved by the gaming community. But should Gigantic really have a comeback? Before you put too much thought into that question, let me just go ahead and answer that for you. No, it should not have a comeback. Gigantic is going to face the exact same problems it faced before, as the hero shooter genre has only gotten harder to compete in over the years. Between the two Goliaths of the genre, Overwatch and Team Fortress 2, there is little to no extra player base. I mean, even Paladins only averages around 3,000 to 4,000 players. With Overwatch averaging around 40,000 players and TF2 topping that with around 70,000 players, there's no room in the market for a game that's already been killed once. On top of having to face off against its competitors, the hero shooter genre is no longer at the forefront of gaming like it was back in 2016 and 2017. Because of this fact, very few new players are coming into the genre, which makes it a necessity to try and take players from the other games, which, at its current state, is something that is impossible for Gigantic to do. As of right now, Overwatch, TF2, and Paladins are all free-to-play games, meaning you have to spend $0 to download and play, whereas Gigantic released with a $16 price tag, meaning that just to even start playing the game, you have to open up your wallet. Even if they wanted to try and do what it took in order to take players from the other games, it would just bring back another problem they had faced multiple times in the past: money. Now, don't get me wrong, Gearbox has the funds at their disposal to promote the game, but if you put them next to studios like Blizzard and Riot Games, if it comes down to a spending battle, Gearbox doesn't stand a chance. From anything like cinematic trailers down to something simple like hiring more developers to create new content for the game, Gearbox would have to spend an enormous amount of money just to try and have Gigantic catch up to where its competitors are. With the gaming industry constantly evolving, it makes zero sense for Gearbox to throw resources at something like Gigantic to compete in a declining genre, rather than try and develop something new that could propel them to the forefront of gaming. Something like their next Borderlands title, which a massive amount of players are already itching for. Another reason it shouldn't have been revived is that very little was actually changed from when it shut down back in 2018. With the re-release, the game added one new game mode, 2 new heroes, a new map, and different profile decorations. So in all that time, Gigantic is practically the exact same game with a much larger price tag. On top of that, many current players are already having issues with long queue times and connection issues. How would issues like this attract players away from established titles that already have stable servers? Now, before I start getting bashed in the comments talking about the game's good, just actually play it, or wow, another unhappy gamer with a new game, I did buy and play the game for a few hours. There are a few things I actually enjoy about the game, such as the art style and the Guardian mechanic of the game. I think the Guardians is a good medium between the deeply hated payload in Overwatch and the classic domination game mode you see in something like Call of Duty. It's also complemented by the goofy looking art style. Between the old witch on the walking broomstick and the crazy man with the potions, the style is relatively good. But outside of those small things, there is really nothing that would drive me to Gigantic and away from the already established titles. All in all, the revival of Gigantic might have stirred nostalgia and brief excitement among its former players, but the harsh reality remains unchanged. Despite its unique mechanic in the Guardians and weirdly charming art style, Gigantic faces an uphill battle against the giants of the hero shooter genre. With an overcrowded market dominated by established free-to-play titles and dwindling interest in the genre itself, the odds are stacked against its success. While Gearbox involvement brings hope, it's crucial to recognize the challenge ahead. It's time to let Gigantic rest in peace and focus on new ventures that have the potential to change and elevate the gaming industry as a whole.